to the book club, man. What a journey it has been. Thank you for that pause.
We're gonna have a mini book club today, finishing this chapter. Been exploring the universe and all this book has been offering us.
Super curious to see what clarity will come in just our conversation just now to the few pages we're gonna read. Yeah, thank you for joining us. Anything else you want to say?
Nope, I'm good.
As the vision progressed, I could tell that the new generation's tendency to analyze and judge arose from a deep-seated intuition that there was more to life than the old material reality took into account. The new generation sensed that there's new spiritual meaning just beyond the horizon. They began to explore other lesser known religions and spiritual points of view. For the first time, Eastern religions were understood in great numbers, serving to validate the mass intuition that spiritual perception was an inner experience, a shift in awareness that changed forever one's sense of identity and purpose. Wow. Similarly, the Jewish Kabbalist writings and the Western Christian mystics, such as Meister Eckhart and Tilliard
Ballard de Chardin.
de Chardin, provided other intriguing descriptions of a deeper spirituality. At the same time, information was surfacing from the human sciences, sociology, psychiatry, psychology, and anthropology, as well as from modern physics, that cast new light on the nature of human consciousness and creativity. This culmination of thought, together with the perspective by the East, gradually began to crystallize into what was later called human potential movement. The emerging belief that the human beings were presently actualizing only a small portion of their vast physical, psychological, and spiritual potential. As I watched, I watched as, over the course of several decades, this information and the spiritual experience it spawned grew into a critical mass of awareness, a leap in consciousness from where we began to formulate a new view of what living a human life was all about, including, ultimately, an actual remembrance of the ninth insight. Yet, even as this new view was crystallizing, surging through the human world as a contagion of consciousness, many others in the new generation began to pull back, suddenly alarmed at the growing instability in culture which seemed to correspond to the arrival of the new paradigm. For hundreds of years, the solid agreements of the old worldview had maintained well-defined, even rigid, order for human life. All roles were clearly defined, and everyone knew his place. For instance, men at work, women and children at home, nuclear and genetic families intact, a ubiquitous work ethic. Citizens were expected to discover a place in the economy, to find meaning in family and children, and to know the purpose of life was to live well and create a more materially secure world for the succeeding generations. Then came the 60s wave of questioning and analysis and criticism. And the unwavering rules began to crumble. No longer was behavior effectively governed by powerful agreements. Everyone now seemed empowered, liberated, free to chart his or her own course in life, to reach out for this nebulous idea of potential. In this climate, what others thought ceased to be the real determinant of our actions and conduct. Increasingly, our behavior was being determined by how we felt inside, by our own inner ethics. For those who had truly adopted a more lived spiritual point of view, characterized by honesty and love toward others, ethical behavior was not a problem. But of concern were those who had lost the outer guidelines for living, without yet forming a strong inner code. Fuck, man, if that's not what we just they seem to be falling into a cultural no man's land where now anything seemed to be permissible. crime and drugs and addictive impulses of all kinds, not to mention loss of the work ethic. To make matters worse, many seem to be using the new findings of human potential movement to imply that criminals and deviants weren't really even responsible for their own actions, but were instead victims of an oppressive culture that shamelessly allowed the social conditions that shaped this behavior.
Oh, that's interesting. It starts going to the external responsibility here.
As I continued to watch, I understood what I was seeing. A polarization of viewpoint was quickly forming around the planet, as those who were undecided now reacted against cultural viewpoint that they saw leading to a runway chaos and uncertainty, perhaps even to the total disintegration of their way of life. In the United States, especially, a growing number of people were becoming convinced that they were now facing what amounted to a life and death struggle against the permissiveness and liberalism of the past 25 years. A culture war, they called it, with nothing short of the survival of the Western civilization at stake. I could see that many of them considered the cause already near lost and thus advocated extreme action. I think that's halfway if you want to jump in.
Yeah. In the face of this backlash, I could see the advocates of human potential moving into fear and defensiveness themselves, sensing that many hard-earned victories for individual rights and social compassion were now in danger of being swept away by a tide of conservatism. Many considered this reaction against liberation an attack by the embattled forces of greed and exploitation, who were pushing forth in one last attempt to dominate the weaker members of society. Here, I could clearly see what was intensifying the polarization. Each side was thinking the other to be a conspiracy of evil. The advocates of the old world view were no longer considering the human potentialists as misguided or naive, but were in fact considering them to be a part of a larger conspiracy of big government socialists, holdout adherents of the communist solution, who were seeking to accomplish exactly what was occurring: the erosion of cultural life to the point where an all-powerful government could come in and straighten everything out. In their view, this conspiracy was using fear of increasing crime as an excuse to register guns and systematically disarm the public, giving ever greater control to a centralized bureaucracy that would finally monitor the movement of cash and credit cards through uplinks into the internet, rationalizing the growing control of the electronic economy as crime prevention, or as a necessity to collect taxes or prevent sabotage. Finally, perhaps under the ploy of an impending natural disaster, Big Brother would step forward and confiscate wealth and declare martial law. For the advocates of liberation and change, just the opposite scenario seems more likely. In the face of the conservatives' political gains, all that they had worked for seemed to be crashing before their eyes. They too observed the increasing violent crime and the degenerating family structures. Only for them, the cause was not too much government intervention, but too little, too late. In every nation, capitalism had failed a whole class of people, and the reason was clear. For poor people, there existed no opportunity to participate in the system. Effective education wasn't there, the jobs weren't there, and instead of helping, the government seemed ready to back away, throwing out the anti-poverty programs with all the other hard-won social gains of the last 25 years. And so as I was reading this, so I was learning a trick with the dragon staff, and it was called hacking the matrix. And like, it's interesting to read the two different sides of this, how they're exactly the same, where they're focusing on who to blame for the problem instead of how to fix the problem.
Right.
And in working with learning that new trick, hacking the matrix, the way he described it was beautiful. He's like, you're going to continue practicing this trick, supporting it, guiding the dragon staff, moving it around, doing all of that. And eventually, as you practice, you'll realize that you don't have to hold it. You'll be able to surrender to the flow and just allow it to move itself, and just trust that the flow is taking it where it needs to go. That is what hacking the matrix is. It's not placing the blame. It's not forcing yourself. It's not inserting yourself. It's the trust, the surrender, the allowing. And in that, you get to learn what the matrix is and how to flow with it instead of against it. And so when we're in the blame and the judgment and the shame, this is me going on now. When you're in the blame and the judgment and the shame, that's you going against the matrix.
And that's exactly parallel to this connection conversation we just had with my fuck. Go with the flow.
Yeah. I could see clearly that in their growing disillusionment, the reformers were beginning to believe the worst, that the rightward swing in human society could only be the result of increased manipulation and control by the moneyed corporate interests in the world. These interests seemed to be buying governments, buying the media, and ultimately, as in Nazi Germany, they would slowly divide the world into the haves and the have-nots, with the largest, richest corporations running the small entrepreneurs out of business and controlling more and more of the wealth. Sure, there would be riots, but that would just play into the hands of the elite as they strengthen their police control. My awareness suddenly jumped to a higher level, and I finally understood the polarization of fear completely. Great numbers of people seem to be gravitating to one perspective or the other, with both sides raising the stakes to that of war, of good versus evil, and both visualizing the other as the perpetrators of a grand conspiracy. And in the background, I now understood the growing influence of those people who claimed to be able to explain this emergent evil. These were the end times analysts to whom Joel had referred to earlier. In the growing turmoil of the transition, these interpreters were beginning to increase their power. In their view, the Bible's prophecies were to be understood literally, and what they saw in the uncertainty of our time was the long-awaited apocalypse, preparing to descend. Soon would come the outright holy war in which humans would be divided between the forces of darkness and armies of light. They envisioned this war as a real physical conflict, fast and bloody, and for those who knew it was coming, only one decision was important: be on the correct side when the fighting began.
Armies of light. What a
Huh?
armies of light. What a fucking word that is.
It takes me back to Star Wars.
Right. Star Wars was such a perfect memory.
Right. Or storyline, because that's that piece is, these forces of light and evil and dark and all of it, they're all stories. And like, what would happen if we just saw that everything was here for us? What if we just chose to believe that everybody was doing exactly what they were meant to do for the highest and best good? Like, what would happen if we were able to suspend our stories and our beliefs that we have grown up with and see things a different way? Like, when we want change, the only thing that we have to do is make a choice. And if we want to live a different life, then we make different choices. It was like that moment when I was like, holy fuck, is being healed just deciding that I'm healed? Like, I lived my entire life knowing that I was wrong, bad, that I was in trauma, that I, had PTSD, that I had this, that I had all the things. I'd lived my entire life like that, and that hadn't worked. So what's a different approach? What's a new approach? I'd never tried living life believing that I was healed. I'd never tried living life believing I was whole and worthy. Like, I wonder what that looks like, and stepping forward, you know,
Welcome to the other side.
yeah, which is actually the exact same side. There are no.
Yep.
Yet simultaneously, just as the other landmark turns in human history, I could see beyond the fear and retrenchment to the actual birth visions of those involved. Clearly, everyone on both sides of the polarization had come into the physical dimension, intending that this polarization not to be so intense. We wanted a smooth transition from the old materialistic worldview to the new spiritual one. And we wanted a transformation in which the best of the older traditions would be recognized and integrated into the new world that was emerging. I could clearly see that this growing belligerence was an aberration, coming not from intention, but from the fear. Our original vision was that the ethics of human society would be maintained at the same time that each person could be fully liberated and the environment protected, and that economic creativity would be at once conserved and transformed by introducing an overriding spiritual purpose. And further, that this spiritual purpose could descend fully into the world and initiate a utopia in a way that symbolically fulfilled the end time scriptures. My awareness amplified even further. And just as when I had watched Maya's birth vision, I could almost glimpse this higher spiritual understanding, the full picture of where human history was intended to go from here, how we could achieve this reconciliation of views and go on to fulfill our human destiny. Then, as before, my head began to spin and I lost concentration. I couldn't reach the level of energy needed to grasp it. The vision began to disappear and I strained to hold on, seeing the current situation one last time. Clearly, without the mediating influence of the world vision, the polarization of fear would continue to accelerate. I could see the two sides hardening, their feelings intensifying as both began to think the other to be not just wrong, but hideous, venal, in league with the devil himself. After a moment of dizziness and a sense of rapid movement, I looked around and saw Will beside me. He glanced my way, then gazed out at the dark gray environment, a concerned expression on his face. We had traveled to a new location. Were you able to see my vision of history? I asked. He looked at me again and nodded. What we just saw was a new spiritual interpretation of history, somewhat specific to your cultural view, but amazingly revealing. I've never seen anything like that before. This has to be part of the 10th, a clear view of the human quest as seen in the afterlife. We're understanding that everyone is born with a positive intention, trying to bring more of the knowledge contained in the afterlife into the physical, all of us. History has been a long process of awakening. When we are born into the physical, of course, we run into this problem of going unconscious and having to be socialized and trained in the cultural reality of the day. After that, all we can remember are these gut feelings, these intuitions to do certain things, but we constantly have to fight the fear. Often the fear is so great we fail to follow through with what we intended, and we distort it somehow. But everyone, and I mean everyone, comes in with the best of intentions. So you think a serial killer, for instance, really came here to do something good? Yes, originally. All killing is a rage and lashing out that is a way of overcoming an inner sense of fear and helplessness. I don't know, I said. Aren't some people just inherently bad? No, they just go crazy in the fear and make horrible mistakes. And ultimately, they must bear the full responsibility of these mistakes. But what has to be understood is that horrible acts are caused in part by our very tendency to assume that some people are naturally evil. Right there, that. That's the mistaken view that fuels the polarization. Both sides can't believe humans can act the way they do without being intrinsically no good. And so they increasingly dehumanize and alienate each other, which increases the fear and brings out the worst in everyone. He seemed distracted again, looking away. Each side thinks the other is involved in a conspiracy of the greatest sort, he added, the embodiment of all that's negative. I noticed he was looking out toward the distance again, and when I followed his eyes and focused on the environment, I began to pick up an ominous sense of darkness and foreboding. I think, he continued, that we can't bring in the world vision or resolve the polarization until we understand the real nature of evil and actual reality of hell. Why do you say that? I asked. He glanced at me one more time, then gazed out again into the dull gray. Because hell is exactly where we are.
Oof. Wow, what a powerful 4 pages.
Mhm.
Holy shit.
Takes me back to that phrase, I stand for all life while standing against none.
Right.
Continuous blame and shame and judgment that we put on people is what continues to increase the fear, the polarization, the need to step into those acts. But what we're to happen if we soften and say, no, the people who are killing others also deserve safety and love and freedom. Like, you also deserve to be seen. through the eyes of love, not the judgment and the blame? Can we too see them as worthy?
Hmm. Wow, that's powerful. It really is deep. And it's hard to articulate that. It's something I've had to embrace on my own because a lot of people can't hear that. A lot of people are very angry at that.
Mhm.
And and so that's a personal thing for me. And it's definitely a personal drive because it's something I've had a deep struggle with all my life because I know what I want to stand for. So then why not have the arguments? Why not have the the backside of that, and it's so special for me to embrace just on the inner side that I don't have to stand against,
Mhm.
just stand for, always being there's always, what's the concept, like, the oh shit, uh not the devil's advocate, but kind of like the devil's advocate, right? Like that's that inner peace for me because I get to see where, yeah, this is inappropriate, but I see why. I see the necessity of it.
And it's, even taking a step back and like in these conversations, right? When somebody has a different viewpoint and they're trying to, explain it and or convince or whatever the case may be, like being able to say, no, you're absolutely right. And so am I.
Mhm.
And seeing how like there are times where people struggle with that type of acceptance, with that type of freedom. Like you're absolutely able to see the world that way. And I'm absolutely free to see the world my way. And they both get to be right. They both get to fit and give you the privilege of your perception. You get to see the world in just the way that you want. And being able to also like be that open space to be able to receive all these different perceptions and find what aligns and find what doesn't. And like the other piece is that the reason we have so much struggle in offering that love and acceptance to the serial killers, to the rapists, to the people who are doing child trafficking and all of those things is because we haven't done the work within ourselves to be able to find compassion for those aspects of ourselves, for those parts of ourselves that we see in the same way we see those people. Because in that sentence, that's why there are those people. That can't be me. And it goes back to Jordan Peterson's phrase, a good man is not a man who claims he would never hurt you. He could never hurt you. A good man is a man who knows he can hurt you and chooses not to. I know what I'm capable of. I know what I can do. I know, like, with everything that I know about the human mind, about human behavior, about psychology, about all of it, I know what I'm capable of. And I refuse. I refuse. This is why I do the work. So I won't do it, but so I can stay in a place of awareness and choose not to.
That's the most dangerous kind of person, the one that doesn't know.
Exactly. We are the most dangerous when we don't know our power,
Mhm. Yeah. Oof.
because then what we're doing, everything we can do to become powerful. And in believing we're not powerful, we don't believe we can make an impact. We don't believe we can destroy lives. We don't believe we can hurt people. And it's in that sentiment that the pain comes.
Right.
These people that are murdering people, they're doing that because they believe they're not powerful, because they don't know their own power. And they do those things so they can feel a moment of power.
Mhm.
And when they do, they realize the impact that they make by taking somebody's life, by doing what they did to somebody. And then they come face to face with it, and then they don't want to see their power. And so then they go back into the blindness, the unconsciousness, taking them to the space of, again, forgetting their power and doing it all over again. Psychosis, addiction. That's where that all stems from. I'm going to do this thing to make me feel powerful. I'm going to recognize my power and see what I'm choosing to do with it. And then I'm going to turn my face because I don't want to see myself.
Right.
Blinding me again to my power and starting the cycle all over again.
It's just a simple.
But when we are able to hold space without judgment, without shame, hold a space where we can hold a reflection of their power and compassion and love when they're sharing these awful things that they've done, and not flinch, that's when we can give them hope and give them an example of how to love themselves, all of themselves, because they don't know how. They've never been shown. And so the deeper the work we do with ourselves, claiming ourselves, accepting ourselves, all of us, and sharing those parts, sharing all of the parts of ourselves that we're either learning how to love or we have learned how to love, and gives people an example, a role model in a way that they may not have had in the past.
Permission. Yeah.
The name of the course that I'm writing came to me this morning, and it's Sacred Self-Intimacy, Claiming the Connection Within. And like, just so many parts, like that's that piece, right? How can we be intimate with ourselves? I sat down this morning and wrote out, what is intimacy? Like, what is intimacy? And just like all of the things that are coming, that came through, like, and that's what it is. Like, this is intimacy, and intimacy opens us to connection. And that connection is what allows us to expand our idea of what love is, of what acceptance is. I can only know love and acceptance from my experience of it. But when I'm able to open and connect with the deeper version of myself or somebody else, I'm able to expand that and see it in ways that I've never seen it before. Have different definitions, different stories, different beliefs, different identities. And like, that's what we get to do when we open ourselves to, the darkness, which is just the parts of ourselves we've been unwilling to see.
Right. The parts we shun.
Yeah.
Oof.
Good.
There's. Well, I hope you have an amazing day.
You too. Enjoy. Have fun. And I will see you later, babe. Love you.
I'll see you tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.